Okay, Jen, I'm so excited to chat with you today because we're going to be talking about what life is like after leaving academia. We're going to address whether folks are okay after leaving academia, whether they feel like they failed. We're going to talk about whether they miss academia after they leave, and whether folks ever go back. So I'm excited to dive into all three of those topics with you. Before we do, for folks who are watching this video, if you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm regularly posting content here that's aimed to help PhD job seekers, whether it's PhD panels on possible career paths or other resources for how to get a job as a PhD. Come back here and subscribe so that you can have first access to that content. So back to our topic for today. What's life like after leaving academia? Jen, you're smiling. I see this is this is a topic that you think about regularly.
So I'm smiling because when you said it, when you press record and you said our topic, the first thing that leaped into my mind was a title of a book. It's a memoir that I read years ago, and the memoir is called The Cliff Walk. Walking, falling over a cliff, right? I think this is one of the like thoughts that runs through people's mind is like, am I running to jump off a cliff? Anyways, let me not derail where you wanted to
Oh
head with this,
no,
but
I think it's so true. I think folks think of it as this leap off of cliff where, and this is like an outdated metaphor, right? But I think it's very apt. This career jungle gym metaphor that you're sort of climbing something that has all these different handholds and paths. It's not a ladder. It's not a cliff, though. I mean, many people who are going up for tenure feel like it is. But in reality, if you look at it at a career-long perspective, which I can say now, having now worked with folks in different decades of their career, it's really a jungle gym. It's not a cliff. Does that resonate with what you've seen with the clients you worked with?
yeah. So, what are we talking about here, right? Like, what happens when people leave academia? So, I think, yeah, there are a lot of fears that go into that, but what actually ends up happening is, and I see this all the time, and this is it really it makes it clear just how fearful folks were because they report back, to me, to you on social media, whatever it is, that like, wow, I should have done this years ago. Like, why did I wait so long? This is good. This is good. Like that kind of is the overwhelming sentiment of like, I should have done this years ago. We don't have to regret that, but like, wow, it is not at all what people worry that it will turn out to be.
No, it's really true. Well, and if I think about my own journey, my own first 6 months after leaving academia, there were these surprises that I hadn't even anticipated, right? Like cash bonuses for good performance. My work is going to give me a computer and give me clothes and all these things that were unexpected. There were also unexpected things about that work environment that I didn't know going in and that were actually challenges that I could never have forecast. But in terms of being able to save for retirement, not something I could have done very much of while I was in academia. I put like tiny bits aside, but it's really not a privilege that most folks have on an academic salary. So retirement savings, living in California, which at the time was something I wanted to do. And so I had that locational flexibility to move back. After having left, I had sort of coped with all the grieving, right? I had grieved and recognized that I hadn't failed. I was just going a different direction. And so I think that allowed me to move out of academia and really celebrate a number of the unanticipated wins in those areas like financial freedom, locational freedom that I hadn't realized I was sacrificing when I was still in the academy.
Yeah, and in terms of like what you actually end up doing, like one of my fears personally was that I would be bored. Like, this is so arrogant as I hear myself talk. But I thought, that I would be bored, that I would stop learning, that I wouldn't be as engaged. I had this vision of academia as like this really creative space, like this intellectual space. Like if I was going to be an intellectual in the world, I roll. But really, right, that had to happen in the academy. And actually in my career now, I mean, I won't I won't claim any of these terms for myself, but I solve problems all the time, right? Like I am faced with difficult challenges all the time. So like if that's what floats your boat, like I do a ton of writing, I do a ton of teaching, I do a ton of figuring out shit, right? I organize stuff. So all of those things that I thought I would like be giving up, actually no, not at all. And there are endless possibilities. And so that's just you and a little bit about me. But let's talk about our clients. Like, what happens when our clients leave academia? What do they experience? You want to start, Tori?
Well, and it was funny, I was going to ask you the same question back of like, what percentage of your clients leave and are not okay? And for me, the folks who I see who are not okay are in the leaving process for a long time. Like the not okay folks are the folks who have been job searching for 12 months and are miserable because job searching is hard. They're not having success. And so they're sitting there trying to leave and not able to. Those folks I see are not okay. But of the folks who I've seen move, like I can't think of any who are not okay. There are ones where the first position that they're in hasn't been a fit and that they retailor, but any of them feeling the same sense of powerlessness or scarcity that they felt in academia, I can't think of a single example. And again, like folks are wrangling with layoffs, various things. So I'm not going to lie and say that there aren't challenges outside of academia. But do I feel like they are not okay or that they are as compressed as they were when they were in academia in terms of their worldview and possibilities? No, like they've all opened this door to more opportunity because they've left. I'm curious for you, Jen, like how many of the folks have you seen go to the other side and be not okay?
Um, like then, I mean, yeah, I mean, to your point, the the act of leaving, that process of leaving, that can take some time, and then job searching is no fun, right? I mean, hopefully we can make it more fun, right? But like, it kind of sucks, right? And hiring is like not the bestly built system. like that, like not great, right? So of course that what can happen is that folks like they're not quite in the right place. And so that becomes a challenge that they want to take on next. But what we see all the time, what I see all the time with my own clients and other folks that I interact with is that they actually feel relief, they feel surprise, they feel gratitude. Not that you owe, an employer your gratitude, but like, as a person, yeah, that sense of like I had a client a few months ago who reported back he, moving to a nonprofit sector was like the best thing he ever done. Maybe he should have done it earlier, but that he's working with a great team who are all united around like a mission that is really meaningful and valuable. They have actual work-life balance because the employer actually does care. Like he literally, the employer does care about, work-life boundaries and balance, and he's working with brilliant colleagues, and that I hear very frequently, right? The other thing that I hear from folks is that they were able to move into a position that they they were like afraid to hope that they could get, right? Like folks moving into like more higher level positions where they worried they didn't have the kind of experience they needed to become directors or whatever. I mean, it depends on the organization. But whereas I talked to a woman a few months ago who was a professor and she left and now is a director of research at some great organization, and she reports like she loves her team, they're doing great work that has immediate impact on the communities that she cares about. Like she never imagined that this could be possible in the relatively short amount of time that it took her. So like that I'm like, yep. like good, yep, did the work, got the result. That's it.
Well, and it's really funny as you're talking about that, I'm realizing that folks who are watching this video might be in that moment of, is it okay to think about leaving? What do I risk when I think about leaving? Might I have all these fears that I'm thinking of in my head come true? And what I'll say there is that those fears, almost never play out, and you can almost envision like, okay, so what if they did? What would I do then? right? To almost give yourself permission to move forward even in spite of the fear. The other thing I will say is that there's this notion, and I definitely wrangle with this, of being a failure. That if you don't succeed in academia, you are a failure writ large. And I think that is a false dichotomy that academics sets up to try to keep people in the system, that like success here is the only success that matters. And if you don't do that, you are a failure and your whole life is meaningless. Like, sounds so silly when you reflect it that way, but that's somewhat of the ethos. And so I think really realizing that, yeah, it's possible to fail in a situation, right? It's possible to fail on a project or on an initiative or on a goal. Does that mean you are a failure? No. Does any particular career choice mean that you have succeeded or failed in life? No, right? Finding fulfilling work is about finding your fit, finding what works for you. And so there might be cases where you don't have a fit and you need to course correct, but none of those mean that you're a failure. And so I think it's important to call that out, that this belief, this fear of failure that might keep people standing still, to some extent you're failing by staying in work that isn't serving you. That might be a toxic environment, that might be exploitative. I think folks fail to recognize the failure in staying still, where change doesn't always mean that there's a risk of more failure than sameness.
It makes me think too of how we each get to define what success means to us. And, I know that, for some people watching this, they may have this thought in their minds of, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's okay for those people. I mean, yeah, because they were never like true academics to begin with, right? Like they never had it in them. Like they're not true intellectual, whatever, right? Like those thoughts of like, well, of course they're fine. But what about me? Like, I'm not going to be fine. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think the same exceptionalism goes the other way.
Mm.
People basically stay in academia because they're like, well, all those people are failing to get jobs here, but I'll be the exception. My supervisors just told me I'll be the exception to this one. Statistically, most of the time, you're not going to be, right? Like probabilistically, like P is less than 0.05 that you're going to get a job in academia. And so just believing either that you have some special opportunity to win in academia, or that, sort of the data you're seeing around you when it comes to folks leaving doesn't apply to you, or that those folks are failures or whatever it is, just doesn't square with the numbers, right? It's worth looking at it as objectively as you can, examining those beliefs that are encouraging you to slant the data in one way or another. Sorry, I'm talking as a quant. It's I have to go that way.
And yeah, it's so important for people to do the work of figuring out for themselves like what actually is important to me. And that's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about you can double your salary, you can like whatever, right? Like it's not about kind of those external metrics unless they matter to you, right? It's not that we think that everybody should be able to move to California. Mean, like if you want to move to California, then we want you to be able to do that. But that, right? It's not that there's sort of like externally imposed definitions of what success is, because that's what academia is doing. Academia as a system, as a structure, as a culture has imposed upon you this definition of success. And what we're asking folks to do and what we see our clients do is say, okay, hold up. What actually is important to me? What's important to me? Where in the world can I have that, experience that, right? Achieve that? Okay, now I'm going to go out and do that, right? And get that. Wow, that is what we want. And what we're saying is that that actually is what people end up experiencing, right? Because they've figured out what it is and they've gone toward it.
Well, and I think what you're saying there really dovetails with our second topic, right? Our second question that we teed up at the beginning was, do folks miss academia? Do they have regrets? And realistically, when you've done that work to define your own sense of success, to let go of what other folks say success should be, and to really take that definition of success into your own hands, you then, again, may have work to do to figure out how to get there, but the like missing that world in which other people's norms were your norms, where you didn't get to define for yourself how you wanted to live your life, I don't encounter many folks who have sort of woken up and taken that ownership and responsibility and opportunity, and who then say, go back to the world where other people define success for me. Like, I really want to go back to that sort of, I don't see folks ever regretting having taken more autonomy in the direction of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think there can be a sense when September, October, like August, September rolls around, and people realize like, oh, I'm not preparing a syllabus. Like, oh, I'm not like answering emails about, you know, opening up my course to an I'm getting the names wrong, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like over enrollment. Like, oh, that's interesting. But for the most part, people may note those things because that's just, the human experience of change, of transition. But once you have identified what actually is important to you, then those aren't things that you really miss in any kind of meaningful way. Um, I don't want to jump to places we don't want to go yet.
Well, I have one more point there on this missing topic that was coming to mind as you were talking about it. Have I personally ever missed academia writ large? No. Have there been aspects of my work there that I missed? Sure. And when I notice those, I then course correct. So for example, when I was working at Facebook, I was in a very impact focused team, and I had wanted to make that move. I had wanted to help drive impact. But what happens when you have impact is there's often less room for just curiosity for the sake of curiosity, right? It's more like, okay, how do we feed that curiosity into impact? And so I wanted to move to a team where there was more curiosity. So I went and moved to a team that was more research oriented over at Google. When I got there, I was like, oh no, this is now too slow. Like, I want to go back to that fast pace of impact. And so I managed to find a happy medium in my third job, which was some room for curiosity and testing and some room for impact. And so I balanced those, but it was only because I was sort of recognizing, okay, here's what I think I miss. Oh, when I go back, now I miss this thing that is new and that I had found outside of academia. So let me see if I can find a place that has both. It becomes much more of a tailoring about aspects of work that fulfill you and finding environments that nurture those, rather than presuming that one environment is going to fulfill everything, because it won't, and it may not forever. It might do so for a time and then stop doing so. And giving yourself permission to do that tailoring allows you far more career flexibility.
Well done. Well done, you. And B, thanks so much for bringing this up. I love this as an example of like, listen, you're not looking for your dream job next, right? Like that is not the task ahead, because if that is a task that you set yourself, like, whoo boy, good luck. That's not what we're trying to do. But as you say, like you're trying to look for the next best fit, given what you know about yourself and what you are able to decipher about the opportunities that present themselves, right? That you could actually go after. And yeah, that you have an opportunity every year or two, in some sectors, like even less than that, to make a shift. And so I think that actually is really common. Like that is really common, that what happens when people leave academia is that they get a first job and realize some things. And like 6 months to 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is later, they shift into a new one. And then, there's a one after that. Obviously, every experience is different. But I think that like moving around a little bit in the beginning, and then it's feeling like, oh, okay, that is actually a really common experience. And a lot of the clients that I work with, I don't know about you, Tori, a lot of the clients that I work with are folks who have, kind of practically speaking, gotten a job outside of academia already. But emotionally or like psychologically, they still feel attached to academia. So in a way, they haven't left yet. So although like the university isn't their employer and they don't have a job title like professor or postdoc, they still feel attached to academia in some way. And so like the leaving academia happens like in a two-step process, first practically and second emotionally. And then it just becomes easier when you have to you have to go and do that hard work of figuring out who you are. But at that point, you already have a network and you know how to write a resume. So like you can just go much quicker into this. I don't know. That feels like a side note, but that also is a thing that happens after people leave academia, that it takes a bit to work out the kinks.
Yeah,
And
well,
you're
it's
getting
funny.
paid. You're getting paid a salary that whole time, right?
Not bad. Well, and it really is. It's good to call out those 2 points. One, which is like tactically getting a new job. Another, which is evolving your worldview and your sense of identity. And I think the two can correlate or they can happen in sequence. And so it's important to call out both of those. The other point that was coming to mind as you were talking that I wanted to be sure to call out, in so many other areas of life, we look for these like 30-year commitments, right? We go put a down payment on a house, or we have this like 30-year mortgage. We go look for a partner where, okay, we're going to be married for the rest of our life. And there's all this celebration of like, look at these people who've been married 30, 40 years. Let's celebrate them. And
You
so
have
there
a
can be,
kid. You have a kid, right?
there you go. Let's check these boxes. And so there can be a tendency, a temptation even, to put jobs into that same checkbox mentality. Like now I've got the forever job, and like now I can check out, like I've got it set for 30 years. And I think unfortunately in jobs, the norms are different from those other norms because the switching costs of jobs are far lower, right? Like liquidating your mortgage, selling your house, getting divorced, those things are actually very high intensity. Leaving a job is actually fairly seamless tactically, right? Like emotionally, it can be complicated, but like the giving notice and actually moving on, very easy. And the opportunity when you do so to grow your career through different skills, different networks, different experiences is problematic if you miss out on. This is not the era of the 1950s where folks get one job for their life and their employer takes care of them and gives them a pension. That's not the employment world we live in now. And so recognizing that things have changed and recognizing that the labor market is far more fluid than maybe those other markets where we look for long-term commitments, I think makes us question a little bit this wanting to have the 30-year job, and maybe opens up the possibility that it's more advantageous for you in this world, in this market, to continue to evolve your career over shorter timeframes.
I mean, I sometimes feel like I should just get a job with an external employer for the experience of having it. I'm missing out.
Well, and I'm really thankful for the things that I learned as part of employers, and I'm happy to be running my own business. And my guess is you probably learn them through doing rather than through like mentorship, right? There are different ways to learn. There are different ways to make choices and expose ourselves to new learning, and ultimately to help you in your career when you're learning more things. And so this last question we had, I want to make sure to circle back to this. Do we see folks go back to academia? Do we ever see folks leave and then go back? What do you see there, Jen?
I'm thinking of a client of mine who was a professor, I'm pretty sure tenured, and moved into the tech industry, for a variety of reasons. So he left academia. You're right, he was a professor. He moved into something technical. Yeah, can't even tell you. And he changed a couple of jobs a couple of times. But there was always something missing, right? He always felt the lack. And I remember us talking about him going back to academia, and we had conversations about a tenure track job opening that seemed like a pretty good fit because it actually, on paper, it was asking for the kinds of things that he had. Somebody who could go in and spearhead a training program for students who are going to go into the tech industry, for example, right? And so he was a nice fit as somebody who had kept up his scholarship and was success anyways, right? What ended up happening was that, wah, 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 of course, they weren't serious about hiring somebody with industry experience. And the institution ended up hiring like, your typical academic who had not escaped academia previously. Anyways, sad story. But the work is, and this, not just for him, but for everybody out there watching, listening, what actually is the lack here? What is the thing that you miss, that you lament for, that you grieve for? What exactly are we talking about here? And the easy answer is like, oh, I miss teaching, I miss research, whatever it is. But like that's too big. That's too broad. So you got to get more specific. What exactly are we talking about here? Because I'm pretty sure nobody actually is lamenting the loss of lecturing in a basement theater on some distant university campus with closed windows and bad audio, whatever, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not exactly what people miss. But so, what exactly are we talking about here? And then, okay, how can you build for yourself opportunities to do that kind of work, whether it is in the context of your job or not? And don't forget this, right? Because, and now I'm giving a speech here, but, we have this sense that the institution, right, your employer is going to bestow upon you everything you need to live a good life. But that's not realistic. Your job is not the be all and end all of your life. And that's why, like, it's good to have work-life balance and not work 60, 80 hours a week, by the way, which is also a benefit of leaving academia for most people. Because you actually do have time to volunteer, for example, to be on a nonprofit board, to start a YouTube channel and not worry about what your chair is going to think about your video choices. I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? You have so many different opportunities, but we're sort of repeating ourselves here. Figure out what it is that is missing. What exactly? What exactly? And then you can go and have that.
100%. And don't assume when you get down to that bottom of what's missing, that the solution is always an external change or always coming from an employer, right? If you are missing teaching and what you're missing is that sense of connecting, mentoring, growing someone else's life, lots of other ways to do that beyond doing so as your primary paid work. And so there are ways to build a portfolio in your life of things you enjoy outside of getting it all from your employer. And so if I go back to this question of, do I see folks go back? Do I see folks who are like, I miss lecturing in that basement room, let me go back, right? I don't think any one of the folks who I've worked with and then placed has gone back. There have been folks who I've worked with who basically come in saying, hey, I want to work with you to get a decision of whether I want to stay or go. And if they have chosen to stay, then they chose to stay, not that they moved and then moved back. I see stories from folks on social media who go back and are very vocal about it. Like, I left and then I went back. And that's awesome, right? Like, if folks find that that's the path of fulfillment they want, go for it. I don't think it's very common. My sense is that probably out of 100 people who leave, maybe only 2 to 3 go back. Which again, if you're sitting watching this video considering it, that sort of stat should be striking, right? That like once folks leave, most of them don't come back. What's that telling you about life on the other side, right? If it were really that, oh my gosh, we all regret this and this is a bad decision, let's veer back that way. And you would see them like clamoring at the edges of these faculty positions. You just don't see it. You don't see it once folks have sort of taken that driver's seat to go drive elsewhere. Very rarely do they feel like they need to make a U-turn, right? It's more like, okay, let me make left turns and right turns with where I'm going ahead of me. Sometimes those do bring folks back to academia, but the sort of let's go backwards because I've made a mistake just doesn't happen because there's so much learning and growth that happens from stepping forward in your career.
Yeah, and I know those stories as well. I can think of at least a couple other people that I know, yeah, who worked outside of academia and have then subsequently went back into roles inside, I guess, faculty, for example, or as PIs. I can think of those too, but I think you're spot on. Karen Kelsky, when she gets asked this question, at least I've heard her respond this way a couple of times, do people regret and do they go back? And can you go back to academia? People ask her, like, can you go back to academia? What if you don't like it? What if it doesn't work out? What if you hate it? And she says, you won't want to. You won't want to. No, obviously it's a bit of a throwaway. We all understand that, but she's basically right, is that this is not a worry. Take that out of your brain. You don't have to worry about this. You're really not going to want to. What might happen is that you're not quite at the right place. And as Tory share, right, as you share in your experience, is this a new job? Is this a reshift of your current responsibilities? Do you need to talk to your manager about taking some work off your plate? Whatever, right? There's so many different possibilities here. Do you need to volunteer to mentor at the little boys and girls club? Whatever it is. I'll give an example for me. One of the things that that I really enjoy, but that I don't get as part of running my own business is kind of bigger meetings where I'm like in the mix with a bunch of different people. And I don't mean like group coaching where I'm the facilitator. Like I like that, or running workshops. And what I end up doing is I volunteer to be on like boards or management committees, and I'm on, a few of those, or like review committees for. Anyways, I could think of like a few different scenarios that I've been involved in over the years, and that's where I get the like group kind of meeting thing that I miss. That most people probably listening are like, Jen, those are terrible, but like since I don't have them, I really appreciate those opportunities. So another example.
Well, and I think what you can hear there, that it's good to sort of tie into the summary as we close, is really, like, what's life like after leaving academia? More choiceful, right? Which I know is not a word, but it's like you have more choices. You get to make more choices. And in doing so, you're going to make some choices that don't lead you down the right path, right? And you're like, ooh, that didn't work out. But these choices of how do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to spend my employed time, my volunteer time, my time outside of work? You just take choices into your hands by making a choice to move. And so life after leaving academia involves more intentional choice, more of a sense of freedom when it comes to where you put your hours and your career experience. And ultimately, that usually leads to more happiness, right? Particularly if then you get more financial freedom along with that, or locational freedom. If you and your spouse want to move to a new place, then great, like you've got more locational flexibility. And so those aspects of freedom and opportunity to choose, I think, are far greater once folks make the choice to leave. Does that align with what you've seen? Anything else to add there as we close?
I want to just close the story that I started with, the Cliff Walk, that book that I mentioned, the memoir. So I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right. So the book is called The Cliff Walk. I'm pretty sure it was published in like 99 or in 98 or something, the last century. I was already grown up. And the author is Don Snyder with a Y, Don Snyder. And if you Google Don Snyder, you might want to read the book and then Google him, because like that's like the big reveal. Uh, that's the order that I did it in. But if you want to skip the book, Google Don Snyder, and yeah, yep, all of what we're saying.
You are giving a good cliffhanger there. What happens to folks who do the cliff walk? You'll just have to leave this video and go find out. So that's a good teaser as we close. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me about this. Hopefully folks listening in got a sense of what the opportunities are if they give themselves permission to set those fears aside and move forward outside of academia. So hopefully folks feel more inspired to make those choices for themselves in their career. Great chatting with you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, folks.